Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Jen Rosenthal. I am Chief Communications Officer at DeFi Education Fund. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on advocating for decentralized finance policy and software developer protection. So I'm particularly excited for this chat. So let's get started. Can you each take a moment to introduce yourselves and your company, so this way the audience knows what we're working with here?
Yeah, so I'm Meeder. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Coinflow. We are a next-generation payment processor. That means that we want our merchants to not have to think about payments. We want them to be able to accept traditional payment methods, cards, bank, global payment acceptance, and receive that money instantaneously, guarantee that money against fraud and disputes, and just ultimately simplify the payments experience for merchants.
Great. You?
Thank you. Hugh Rhodes, co-founder, co-CEO of RE Networks. RE Networks is a blockchain-based platform that takes private credit loans and their cash flows, tokenizes them, and makes them composable. Our focus is on corporate transactions. So for those familiar with the space, syndication, seasoning for offshore distribution, CLO creation, structured products. So if you think about a lot of the discussion around RWA and tokenized assets, perhaps by DTCC or Securitize, those are taking assets that exist today and tokenizing them and making them available for retail. We are the supply chain upstream from that. We start with the raw ingredients, the loans, the instruments themselves, the leases. We give the fund managers the ability to monetize those and unlock value by transacting in a pro-to-pro environment, and then ultimately create new instruments which will feed the supply chain and give the larger market more options.
Beautiful. Pete?
Bartosz, Lipinski. I started Cube, which is a crypto exchange. It started with a very basic idea, which is we're not happy with all the other exchanges, especially after what happened with FTX, when users lost their funds. So when we started building the exchange, we started with building decentralized custody infrastructure that runs actually on Solana validator client with its own validator set, like from Brian, for example. With a very basic idea that if you are trading either perps or spot, you should own your asset unless you are actually having orders on the order books. We integrated directly in all the chains. All the infrastructure was built in-house here in Chicago with bringing people in from traditional high-frequency trading shops like Citadel, Jump, DRW. We run order books off-chain with focus on pro traders. So we support like Fix, high performance matching, and everything is running on our own custom hardware.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Last but not least.
I'm Emmett. I am the general manager and head of Solana Mobile. We're a part of Solana Labs, and what we've been up to for the last 4 years is trying to bridge the growing divide between all of this exciting on-chain innovation that's happening and the fact that most people access the internet and access their money from their phones. But those existing mobile ecosystems have been relatively closed off to all this innovation. So for users, what that means is we really want to build the tools and the apps and the services that give them a simple but safe experience on their phone, whether it's holding assets or moving those or trading those. And for our developers, we want to give them an alternative path to distribution. Historically, if you've been a mobile developer, you have to play by Apple and Google's rules, which can be a bit draconian. We've sought to build something that's more friendly, something that's more crypto forward, more Web3 first, and trying to bring that group of users who care around the world about digital assets together with this growing audience of developers. So we've done that by shipping 2 phones, first Saga and then Seeker, but also have built a whole technology stack to power them.
And let's stay with you, Emmett. I mean, so why choose to build on-chain? What are the benefits of building on-chain? And then would love to hear from the rest of the panelists on why particularly on-chain finance is interesting as well.
Yeah, for building on-chain, for us, we think of ourselves very much as a platform, right? We do have some products, we do have some services, but there's very clearly growing demand around the world to hold your assets, to not be dependent on centralized exchanges, to not necessarily be dependent on kind of the traditional money rails. And because phones play such a critical role in people's money experience, whether it's sending peer-to-peer payments on Venmo, we heard the team earlier there, or trading new types of products, that world is inevitably going on-chain, and so we can't have phones that are sort of barred from that world. And so it feels kind of obvious in retrospect to build the connection between this growing on-chain world and mobile. But those ecosystems have been relatively closed off. So to make that progress takes quite a bit of work, which is kind of how we've been thinking about the world for the last few years.
Yeah, for me, I think it's like somewhat simple. Like if I put my engineer hat on, which is like the first thing is like distribution. If you're starting your company, you want to actually access all the users that are out there, rather than building your own ecosystem. And that's especially important if you are building something in finance. Usually the products there are like dual-sided marketplaces, and having the side that like brings actually the demand allows you to provide a supply. Like you don't have this cold bootstrap problem. Then next is like composability, super straightforward. A lot of products that are built on chain are just composable. My favorite one, for years have been like AMMs. They are like much better to compose with than order books for a number of reasons. If you are doing like routing to actually discover the best execution across different like assets, you can just do it. And then from the user's perspective, just ease of use and access. Yes, you need to maybe learn a couple of things. Okay, what do I do to save all my 24 words and not lose them and use the wallets and all of that? But once you get through these initial hurdles, you actually get access to multiple products that would require you to onboard to different institutions and wouldn't be connected, right? So as a user, I'm always a big fan of just interacting directly, either from the phone, like Solana Mobile, or from Phantom Wallet, where you just get access to like easy trading, like borrow and lend protocols, high-yield products. It's basically like equalizes access to finance across the world.
It's an interesting question because I guess we're building in finance and we're leveraging the blockchain, and we've all decided to build on a public blockchain, and there are a lot of reasons why you would want to do that. But I do feel like that the train has left the station in the sense of blockchain and finance, because look at what JP Morgan is doing. The distributed, the mechanism for maintaining a database, distributing incentive for security, but providing a state machine which can be updated and referenced, is just a miracle, in the same way that at one point the internet felt like a miracle. It's just better. That doesn't mean it doesn't come with trade-offs, and you do have to know what you're doing. But you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. I think the difference is we're all out here talking about building on-chain, whereas, again, these large fintech, the large banks are also building on-chain. They're just charging everybody the same fees that they were before with zero cost. So what I would say is that if you're looking to build and you're looking for, and you need a global system that is reliable, independently verifiable, largely on-chain, unhackable, and frictionless, then the building on the blockchain is great.
Yeah, for us, the question really started with solving a pain point, right? Not starting with the technology. So we really started with the fact of how can we make it so that our merchants can accept a credit card payment and then get that money instantly? And that mechanism just doesn't exist outside of the blockchain, outside of on-chain, outside of stablecoins. And so we really started from there and worked backwards. And a lot of the things that my fellow panelists said really resonated with me, like the composability, where now all of a sudden we can allow our merchants to have access to financial products, loans, yield, et cetera. But starting with the blockchain for us, we wanted to make it invisible. We didn't want to make it more complicated for our merchants to have to understand this world of crypto and Web3 and all these different terms. So for them, we really focus on the benefits of speed, transparency, access, cross-border.
Yeah. Well said. I want to pivot a little bit to the evolution of financial markets. We're sitting here in Chicago. I know many of you are from Chicago. What would you say to a veteran CME trader who is learning about this space? Like, what are the material benefits of building on-chain finance? How would you explain it to them?
When I was 19 years old, I got an internship on the Mercantile Exchange here, working for a firm then called O'Connor and Associates, now then sold to Swiss Bank. O'Connor and Associates' claim to fame was they invented the synthetic option. They were the first ones to realize that you could create a synthetic option by combining out-of-the-money puts or calls and futures. And the magic is they didn't tell anybody that that's what they were doing. So for about 2 years, until everybody caught up, they were busy buying things that looked like they were worthless and turning them into things that were valuable. And I think that is the way. Often the answer is hidden in plain sight, and there's precedent even with technology. Even in let's say in the mid to late 90s, when people were still questioning about the internet and what's what's valuable about it. Mickey Drexler at J. Crew did more online sales in '97 than he did through his catalog. So what I would say to the veteran trader is, if you're wise at your craft, then and you've already found a way to distinguish yourself by just being good at what you do, then this is another tool. Understand it, and when you figure out the insight, don't tell anybody, just make a ton of money.
That's compelling.
Yeah, maybe I'll expand on that. And for me, it's pretty straightforward. I think everyone is excited about perpetuals, prediction markets. I think CME doesn't support them right now. So obviously, if you want to trade those, CFTC is approving them with DCO and DCM. And you can create more interesting products on top of that, combining perpetuals and prediction markets and trading the actual products that are not available anywhere else right now. And giving that, having a liquidity access across the world is very empowering.
When I talk to some of my friends in TradFi, one of the things that they say, skepticism, is, well, what about AML? But what about compliance? What about all the regulations? We need to make sure that things are secure for our customers. So just curious if you have gut reactions or responses to that.
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot from our partner banks, is how can we make sure that the merchants that we're settling money to are not taking that money and using it for nefarious purposes?
Yeah.
And the advantage of the transparency of the blockchain allows us to look at money through multiple hops after it leaves the merchant's account. So we can settle money with a merchant, and then we can know if that money ends up in an Indonesian scam farm, or if that money is ending up in a Venezuelan bank account. We can see all of that for the rest of time, and so it makes our AML program significantly more robust, significantly more capable than anything that exists in the traditional financial system.
And of course, there's the KYC, there's the AML components, but there's also the entry point. I think somebody mentioned a 24-word seed phrase. There's a lot of new constructs in this world of on-chain money. I think as an industry, we're sort of reaching this point where we know that the early adopters who were very comfortable just nerding out and learning those things are not going to be the same users that come on-chain next. And so whether it's thinking about it from a mobile system perspective, whether it's thinking about it from an exchange perspective, there's a lot that can be done for user security by making the actual user experience simpler and less kind of convoluted and exposing fewer of those internal working parts. I think the rest of the internet and the rest of banking and finance has done a reasonably good job with that over the last 10 to 15 years, at least a good enough job. And so I think we're starting to reach a turning point in our industry where there's that similar push to kind of scare users just a little bit less, give users a little bit more confidence. And if there's things you can do to better secure their assets and teach them slightly better hygiene, then you end up with a safer, more secure ecosystem overall.
Yeah.
I would also say that's why we've chosen Solana. This is their conference, but it's an earnest plug. We looked at a lot of chains. So on our system, we're dealing with very large loan transactions in the future, payments in the future, which means we had to create a tokenized mechanism for credit exposure to allow for a payment to be due in the future. And a lot can happen between now and the future. If I lend you money in a year or two, you might fall out of compliance. A lot of things can happen. So leveraging the Solana and their token extensions, we've built a DVP so that at the time of transaction, when you issue debt, corporate debt, any other type of debt, even at the time of repayment of the principal of coupons, at every point we can insert the proper KYC and AML checks, because at least in corporate finance, there's not going to be any compromise. It's not going to be like, well, here's the benefits, and so let's relax over here. It has to be 100%. But the good news is that you can replicate all of the constraints we've found. You can replicate all of the constraints necessary for compliant corporate transactions.
Yeah, you can probably do it actually better. It all starts with like this principle of transparency, right? It's a public ledger of all the transactions. All the addresses are assignable. You can actually track it across multiple blockchains. Most of the exchanges and like market participants avoid like mixers or the private networks. They are really not like that accessible, and like they're just banned from most of the projects. So I think it actually makes it easier to do like the proper KYC and AML on chain than what's happening in traditional finance. When you look at like advent of all the AI, deep fakes, and dealing with that, like most of the institutions just don't have the answer to like, okay, someone generated a fake passport. They joined the call from North Korea and fake the accent, face, everything. And most of the institutions will not catch that, but you will actually catch it on chain with like following where did the money actually went.
Yep.
Yeah.
So pivoting a little bit to talk about the policy world, just given the theme of the conference is kind of bridging the divide between Wall Street and Washington. How much does the policy landscape actually factor into how you're thinking about or what you're actually thinking about building?
Yeah, tremendously. The Genius Act was a watershed moment for us. It was the first time that banks were now coming to us and asking us about how they should think about their stablecoin strategy, and were willing to partner with us, and it allowed us to just expand our business tremendously. So before, when it was 100 questions from the bank, now they were the ones coming to ask us.
Were they ready? When Genius came, do you felt like they were ready for that conversation?
I think they were interested.
I don't know if they were ready. We started getting calls right away, and there were often two questions, and these are from very large private credit lenders. One, can you help us with stablecoins? And two, what is a stablecoin? And I think that's because, looking over the technology innovations that some of us have been through, starting with web to mobile to cloud, it's usually sort of like resist, okay, fine. And the okay, fine moment is not some big understanding where they now delve into the depth of how it works. They just accept like, okay, this is how it's going to be. Let me retool, let me refocus. And I think the fact that Genius passed had a bigger impact than actually what was in it. Not to take anything away from the heroic work it took to get it over, but the fact that it existed was this sort of switch that flipped, and all of a sudden, it just became like, okay, A, can you tell us what it is, and B, how do I make this work?
Mm-hmm. We've had like many kind of interesting perspectives with which to think about this. The first is as a merchant. We've sold 200,000 phones around the world, and the vast majority of that sales volume was done via stablecoins. And this was like primarily a year and a half, 2 years ago. So there were a lot of furious slacks, a couple of my legal teams here, just trying to figure out what the rules were, how to work with the Shopifys of the world and the Stripes of the world. And some of that anxiety as a business who wants to be paid in stablecoins, like better clarity around that, I think could free up a lot of new types of businesses to operate in new ways. But additionally, we've built an alternative app store. We have more than 1,000 apps. Some of those teams have one team member who's building an app. Some of them have hundreds of team members, but a lot of them are new. These are builders who are trying to find their first 10 users, 1,000 users, 10,000 users. To expect these businesses who are trying to build in this landscape of innovation to also follow these like hard to understand rules and regulations and know if they're crossing a line or not crossing a line adds so much more burden when all they want to do is focus on building a really cool product. And so as the person who's trying to help secure distribution for them and build a relationship with their customers, it's not our job to give them that guidance, but it's hard not to feel a little bit responsible to make sure that their journey to find those first customers is as smooth as possible. So, we think about it from a lot of different perspectives.
Are there policies you guys are bumping up against or things you want to see change that would help you build better, faster, more efficiently, better for consumers, pick your adjective, in the United States?
I think like just having the conversation and dialogue with different institutions, be that SEC or CFTC, is like what matters. Comparing it to like years before when we started Cube, for example, it's like the venture capitalists would say, why do you build in the United States to like you should build here? Like I think that's really the main difference. You can have the conversation now, you can go to the regulators and you can actually talk with them about, hey, this is how we are building it, how does it fit? And it's much easier to do it right now in the United States. For example, in Europe, I think like MiCA is interesting, but like the implementation in each country is very messy. You can see that with like exchanges being exited from different European countries. So the conversation, I think, is what matters rather than individual like policies.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Hugh said a little bit earlier, where for us, getting financial institutions comfortable with like having that conversation is more important than necessarily like the meat of the legislation. So just continuing to make people more comfortable to like dip their toes into the water to then be able to have more of those conversations, bring new ideas to the table, and just push the entire industry forward.
Yeah. I'm sure the policy people in the room who like wordsmith the bills are loving these answers. So looking ahead, when we talk about the future, you all have really interesting perspectives. I think that developers often see around corners better than, news media, no offense to my reporter friends in the room. And so I'm really curious, what are you paying attention to? What is on the horizon? What is on your radar that has you excited about the next few years?
I can speak from, with respect to mobile and kind of like my somewhat narrow, somewhat broad focus. There are a lot of big consumer technology companies who are investing in this and are in kind of wait and see mode, right? Like it doesn't take, you don't have to know too much to know that the Apples and the Samsungs, et cetera, of the world are thinking about this and kind of waiting to know exactly what to do. But I think the fact that those investments are being made, the fact that everyone who sells consumer electronics, companies who are carriers, are starting to think about what the relationship that they build with their customers means, if they can offer those customers a more native way to hold their money. They don't have to think about, oh, well, you have to go find a bank or download an app from a store and hopefully you have access, and oh, you want to go to Western Union, drive and find the nearest location. Trying to build that into one of the most precious things that people own, which is their phone, in many cases their only way on the internet. I just think there's a lot happening. I'm excited about what we're building, of course, but I also think there's just like a tide that is continuing to rise around the idea that these very trusted devices are meeting up with this new form of money. So we'll be interested to see not only what we do, but what some of these big consumer technology companies do in the next few years.
Super straightforward. Excited about Solana and like deeper integration into like actual finance, perps on chain, prediction markets, and like more products moving actually to Solana chain. I think it's like proving itself, and people are considering abandoning the chains that they are working on and like actually building on top of Solana. So pretty straightforward.
There's a panelist earlier from the law firm Crow that talked about how their clients are asking, first can I tokenize my buildings, but then can I tokenize the rent? And I think that right now we're, consuming the RWA movement is consuming what's available in terms of existing things to tokenize. But at the same time, we are seeing the same push. A very large owner of real estate leases, not real estate, airplane leases, was talking to us about monetizing the equity tranche of their airline leases. Could they start thinking about making new investments, new instruments for high net worth, ultimately for retail, that weren't just indexes or funds, but these collection of airlines? Or on the real estate side, could you imagine instruments where it's not just REITs, but you're buying the branded anchor tenants That type of flexibility, really bringing the composability on the instrument side with the distribution side, I think that's ultimately when things get really interesting for consumers.
Yeah, for me in the sort of like the payments world, I think the most interesting conversations that are happening right now are around agentic payments. So figuring out how AI is going to change commerce, whether that's consumer commerce, whether that's business to business commerce, whether that's machine to machine commerce, right? And so figuring out like those intersections of payments, AI, how stable coins or other traditional payment methods are going to play in that world. Just last week, we announced a partnership with MasterCard and a consortium of other large payment companies in the world, sitting down and talking about like and identified like the 5 major problems that exist in agentic payments and pulling together a working group to figure out like what that actually looks like. How can we build a network around that? So very excited for that.
Very cool. Well, we are out of time, but I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today, but also for building the future of on-chain finance. And thank you all for listening.